I am pleased to introduce Jim Dieter, founder and executive director of the Asset Leadership Network. Jim is a good friend, a mentor, a collaborator, and I'll say co-conspirator as we tackle this challenge of raising the bar for asset leadership and advocating and championing the notion of bringing asset leadership to federal assets and across the country. So Jim, we turn it over to you.
Oh, well, thank you very much for those great words. It really is exciting every year for this event. And I think in its own way, maybe even more exciting this year. Just a lot of great ideas coming together. Several topics that I'm really interested in, including our initiating a discussion about equity and asset leadership, areas where we can really make a difference. So I'm trying to, as the leader of this group, but also with my participation in TC 251, one of the strengths I think I bring is trying to see complex things in a simpler way. So that's what I'm going to talk about, a few topics this morning that I think we might think we already know about, but perhaps there's a slightly simpler way to think about them and how they all come together. Restructuring America, audacious, huh? But we all know that it's necessary. And there's so much involved in national assets and infrastructure, and a lot of people involved in it. And these are words from ISO 55001 in the introductory sections. Requirements for establishment, implementation, maintenance, and improvement of a management system for asset management, referred to as an asset management system. I can't tell you how much time we spent talking about that simple concept, but nobody thought a asset management system was too much of too easy to trip up the tongue. And then from 55,000, the definition of an asset management system talks about elements of an organization and establishing asset management policy and asset management objectives. And of course, the processes needed to achieve those objectives. So several key factors brought to the forefront right away. Now, what it's not saying, what's not in ISO 55000, is that this is an asset system. So it's not about asset policy and asset objectives. So a subtle and important difference. Now, nobody's saying that overall it's not about assets. The standard is about asset management. So 55001 describes a management system for asset management. Doesn't describe a management system for assets, not about managing assets. It is about asset management. And you see how I've cleverly put a big number up here to help you recognize the places, the points I'm trying to make today. So that's the first one, and probably a lot of you are tuned into that. Jack Dempsey, who's a key player in TC 251 and ALN Senior Fellow, has written an excellent paper on the difference between managing assets and asset management. And that is available on the TC 251 website. You can find it just by Googling that. But that does bring it to asset management then. So love, talked about simple, love, simple definition. Coordinated activity of an organization to realize value from assets. Very simple and really groundbreaking definition. Because it's about the organization and the value from the assets. That's a big deal. Now, two key factors in that short definition are about activities and about value. Let's talk about each of those for a few minutes. So a definition that's not in either of those documents is a definition of asset management activities. So I would define that as the activities of an organization to realize value from assets. Now, asset management activities is mentioned as a concept multiple times, but not in a featured way in the documents. But in actually implementing ISO 55000, it's really important. So what does that look like? So I got a zebra chart here with a multicolored zebra. And you see that I've listed a lot of different asset management activities. I don't think too many of them that we can argue, aren't about assets and asset management. But if you're looking there and saying, well, I don't see mine, or I don't see ones I'm thinking of, we could probably have 1,000, pieces of pie in this chart. There are a lot of different asset management activities. Just a core concept. But somehow we didn't get it into 55,001. I personally going to see what we can do about that. Now you see also some of those, I'm not going to get into that today, but some of these are directly about assets like maintenance and operation. And some are about asset information, BIM, reliability, inventory, audit, are really more about asset information. I've talked about, in past talks in our fall event, talked about my 3-circle chart about strategy, tactics, and operations. So we're firmly in the tactics and operations area here. So here's an example from, that's based on an actual implementation that I was involved in. And the people in the room, when we started working on this, were these pieces of the pie, were these asset management activities and how they fit together. Notably, the IT asset management people decided they didn't want to play. And all of the IT assets were no longer a part of the ISO 55001 implementation at that organization. That's a significant change in the scope. So scope is very much related to this. The portfolio of assets is very much related to it. When we talk about NALs in a few minutes, a key part of NALs, if you haven't had a chance to look at it, is an asset taxonomy that talks about that portfolio of assets. But here we're talking about the asset management, the asset management activities that are involved in dealing directly with the assets. So we talked about the activities. Let's talk about value. Now that can be a tough discussion. But back to simple, the definition of asset that you see there, and I think probably all are familiar with, is again on that value to an organization. And this really is an earth-shattering definition change. From a finance perspective, has kind of owned this definition in the past. And the definition of capital asset has become the definition of asset. And it's really the value of assets, and more from a compliance and depreciation perspective. And I lived in a compliance world for the first many years of my life in asset management. And in a compliance world, you only spend the money you need to spend. It's not about return on investment. It's about how little can we spend to be compliant in anywhere that I ever worked. But now we're talking about the value to an organization and how we in asset leadership, asset management, can be involved in realizing that value to the organization. But our challenge has been, how to reveal that value. How to reveal that value. So the TC 251 has already made a couple attempts to talk about value, and they showed how complex it was because we couldn't get any kind of consensus around the topic. But I'm going to put myself on a limb today with a couple statements here. And the first is that we talk about value. To me, the first things you think about is how is the value expressed? And then the second thing is how is the value measured? How is it expressed and how is it measured? And I'm not going to get into measurement today. That would take, much more time. So value is an expression of the achievement of the organizational objectives that we've been talking about. So in a for-profit organization, the objective is money, or better, triple bottom line, people, profit, and planet, or there's newer, better approaches to that as well. Your own organization could have its own approach to it. But the bottom line is it's largely financially organized and expressed. Now, in a not-for-profit, which really is in government, which is really the subject of another TC 251 effort, which is a draft of a document called ISO 55011. The goal is to talk about asset management in governments and what's different about that. And I think a big one is what I'm saying right on this slide. In not-for-profits and governments, the objective is policy and programs. You might be able to express those in financial terms, but distributing checks to Social Security recipients is a policy and program, and the assets that support that program, their objective is to get those checks delivered. We could go on and lots of different examples. It's an interesting topic, but objective, policy, and programs. All right, so let's circle back to asset management now and focus on the first couple words of this, which says it's a coordinated activity. I wrote a whole white paper, I drafted a white paper saying that the word coordinated shouldn't be in that definition. And I could still make that argument, but I think it's easier to think about what are those coordinated activities of an organization, all right? We talked about that. So we also, in 55,000, didn't talk about who is doing the coordinating. Leadership is mentioned in ISO 55,000 in terms of here's what we need from leadership to get asset management done, to accomplish those asset management activities. But it doesn't address who should be running this in an organization. Should it be everybody? Should it be some of the people? Should it be a separate office? Should it be a team? We didn't go there. We wasn't there. But we see that's where asset leadership fits in and is in fact the definition of asset leadership, is planning and directing the activity of an organization to realize value from assets. So it's making it happen in the organization, and especially in achieving the mission and objectives of the organization. So let's think about that, the mission and objectives of the organization. So asset leadership connects the organizational objectives to the asset management objectives. When those of us who have had the chance to work on strategic asset management plans, or SAMPs, know that this connection becomes really important. It's what's working on real world cases. It's what brought this to the forefront in my thinking, is you have the asset management objectives, and now we're trying to say, well, what are the organizational objectives? And then how do I tie the asset management objectives to those organizational objectives? In the NOWS effort, again, which we'll follow in a couple of minutes here, one of our initial problems when we started working on it last year was, what are the national objectives? Wow, you don't see those listed anywhere. Agencies has objectives, but national objectives are often buried deep within policy and bills that are passed, and are difficult to put in one place. And of course, some of those, as we're well aware in the political season, are things that can change from administration to administration. Others, perhaps not, perhaps need to be more stable. Sustainability is a simple one to think of as a national objective. And it's easy to see how a national objective of sustainability could be tied to an asset management objectives and how to accomplish that nationally and then in the various sectors of an organization. So that's my last big point I wanted to talk about. Hopefully those simple concepts resonate with you and perhaps give you an opportunity to talk to others about them, or to have them in mind for both for the presenters and for the participants in the activities over the next 3 weeks, to think about how those resonate, across what we're trying to do here. And I always say, from an asset leadership perspective, we're really looking for win-wins on how we can help organizations be successful using asset management and the asset management system that's laid out in ISO 55000. That's a really, really strong document, and work has begun on even improving it over the next few years. So it's a great opportunity, and it's a great opportunity for us as we are involved in an organization and in a profession that's really on the upswing and is more and more being a topic of conversation and a force that can contribute that value to organizations. So just a couple takeaways on the significance. That asset leadership connects asset management to larger organizational and to the organization mission and objectives. And that asset related decisions can be made based on organizational mission and objectives. Steve Whitten from the city of Calgary, it's a great story that we've told in the past, but I'll share it again, is when they started out going on their asset management journey, they had organizations coming to them and saying, I need money for bridges, I need money for tunnels, I need money for pedestrian overpasses, I need money for trains. And they had to make those decisions independently. When they consolidated their asset-related budget in an asset management department, they were able to move to the decision point to being, we need to move people. How do we want to do it? And where do we want to invest our resources? As we think about the nation's infrastructure and other assets, importantly, not just infrastructure, going forward, I think that's the opportunity that presents itself, is to make decisions on where we're trying to go and what we're trying to do, and think about the value not of assets, but the value from assets, and the value that these assets provide to the constituencies of the government and to organizations.